You know what they say about first impressions. You only get one shot. And nowhere does that matter more than in the high-stakes world of blockbuster filmmaking. It feels like just yesterday the internet was hailing James Gunn as the savior of DC, the man who'd finally rescue a franchise that had stumbled again and again. First, it tried to go head-to-head with Marvel under Zack Snyder's dark, brooding vision. That didn't work. Then came a short-lived girl boss phase that faded faster than a bad Twitter trend. And when The Rock tried to make it his personal playground with Black Adam, that didn't exactly set the box office on fire either. By that point, DC's cinematic universe wasn't just struggling, it was gasping for air. And then there was James Gunn, the creative genius behind Guardians of the Galaxy, the quirky director who turned a talking raccoon and a tree into household names. Fans thought, if anyone can save DC, it's this guy. But well, that confidence didn't last long. Sure, Gunn made some bold moves. He dismissed Henry Cavill, arguably the most beloved Superman since Christopher Reeve, just weeks after the actor publicly announced his return. Then he axed nearly every upcoming project, except, of course, the ones involving his wife and his brother. Pure coincidence, right? And even though Gunn was often accused of being a one-trick pony, recycling his Guardian-style humor into every new project, people kept convincing themselves, it's fine, he knows what he's doing. Everything will work out. You sure about that? Because now, it looks like didn't quite work out. The James Gunn honeymoon phase is officially over. The hype's gone cold, the trust is fading, and after one underwhelming movie and two lackluster TV shows, fans and critics alike are starting to ask, was handing DC to James Gunn really a good idea? Just a few days ago, Forbes published a sobering breakdown of the numbers. According to their report, Superman pulled in around $615 million worldwide, which sounds impressive, until you realize that after distributor cuts, the studio only walked away with a bit over $300 million, nowhere near the $350 million needed to break even on production and marketing. That, my friends, is what Hollywood calls a flop. And if Forbes, one of the most industry-friendly outlets in entertainment media, is openly calling it a disappointment, you know it's worse than it looks. We're not talking about some obscure superhero here either. This is Superman, the symbol of comic book history, the hero that started it all. If a studio can't make him work, what hope do they have for anyone else? Unfortunately, things aren't looking much brighter on the small screen either. Creature Commandos, Gunn's first official project in his DC Universe, landed with a thud. An animated show about characters nobody had ever heard of, loosely tied to the bigger DCU, and mostly ignored by fans. Then came Peacemaker Season 2, Gunn's so-called passion project. It also happens to star his wife, who, somehow, keeps getting cast in nearly every James Gunn production. Must just be a wild coincidence, right? Gunn hyped the show non-stop, promising that it would redefine DC television and set up the franchise's grand future. But as many fans joked online, if there's one thing James Gunn is good at, it's hyping his own work, even when the results don't live up to the promise. Because when it comes to this new DC era, the more he talks, the less people seem to believe. But in the end, none of that hype made a difference. Despite all the noise, Peacemaker Season 2 didn't even crack the Nielsen Top 10. The online buzz? Practically non-existent. The discussions that did pop up mostly revolved around one thing: James Gunn's decision to turn the show into a loud, heavy-handed political lecture. Subtlety? Let's just say it hit with all the grace of a tactical missile strike. At a time when most audiences are getting exhausted by forced messaging in their entertainment, Gunn somehow managed to alienate even the small, loyal fan base that was left. The outcome? After an initially strong premiere, viewer interest nosedived, ratings flatlined, and never came back up. By the time the season wrapped, Warner Bros. Had already decided to cancel plans for a third season entirely. And that, right there, says everything. There's no hiding it anymore. James Gunn's DCU is in serious trouble. It's barely begun, yet audiences already seem bored, confused, and disconnected. And what's coming next doesn't exactly inspire confidence either. Next year's DC slate includes Supergirl and Clayface, characters that even hardcore comic fans admit are a tough sell for mainstream audiences. Let's be real here. If Superman, one of the most iconic heroes in pop culture history, couldn't bring people to theaters, what chance does a villain made of mud have? At this point, maybe it's time to face reality. Whatever was needed to revive DC after years of missteps, James Gunn clearly wasn't it. Now, I get it. There are fans who defend Gunn like he's some kind of pop culture messiah, but even they have to admit the truth. The man's made mistakes. Big ones. And perhaps his biggest blunder was not making a clean break from the chaos of the old DCEU. When Gunn took over, the DC film universe was already a tangled mess. Multiple creative visions clashing, leftover pieces from Zack Snyder's abandoned storylines, characters that appeared and disappeared with no explanation. You had questions swirling around Henry Cavill's Superman, 3 different Batmen active at the same time, a Joker film completely isolated from the main timeline, a separate Batman franchise still getting sequels, and on top of that, Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, which were basically Gunn's personal projects shoved into the mix. And let's not forget the Snyder Cut of Justice League, which only made the timeline confusion even worse. If Gunn had really wanted to fix things, he should have done what fans were quietly hoping for: pull the plug on everything, let the franchise cool down for a few years, and then reboot from scratch. Start fresh. Clean slate. Simple. Instead, he went for this bizarre half measure. He killed off most of the old DCEU, but kept Suicide Squad and Peacemaker. Conveniently, both his own projects. Total coincidence, right? Meanwhile, Matt Reeves' The Batman and Todd Phillips' Joker films were allowed to exist in their own separate continuities. And now, Gunn plans to introduce yet another version of Batman and Joker inside his DCU. Brilliant idea, James, because nothing says cohesive storytelling like having 3 Batmen running around at once. The result? Instead of a bold new beginning, audiences got another messy, rushed, and directionless reboot attempt. A franchise too scared to take bold risks, too impatient to rebuild properly, and too confused to even understand what made its heroes iconic in the first place. So really, can you blame the audience for tuning out? Why should anyone invest their time or emotion in a universe that probably won't even exist a few years from now? Because right now, it feels like DC isn't just struggling to compete, it's struggling to survive. If you thought James Gunn's first mistake was bad, his second one might just be what sealed his fate. See, Gunn is undoubtedly talented. No one's denying that. The problem is that his creative range is very limited. Instead of adapting his style to fit each project, he tries to make every project adapt to him. Watch any James Gunn film or series, and you'll start to notice the same pattern playing out again and again. A bunch of quirky, broken misfits are forced to team up, they clash, they banter, they bond over some tragic backstory, and by the end, they've somehow become one big dysfunctional family. It's the same formula every single time. Snarky dialogue, awkward self-aware humor, retro pop music playing over fight scenes, and a main character with deep emotional trauma. It worked beautifully for Guardians of the Galaxy back in the day, but now it's starting to feel like a song that's been on repeat for far too long. Gunn's storytelling peaked about a decade ago, and instead of evolving, he's been replaying his greatest hits ever since. And while that formula might still work for a ragtag team of space pirates or misfit antiheroes, it completely collapses when you try to apply it to Superman. You could practically see the struggle on screen, Gunn bending over backward to force the Man of Steel into his quirky, self-deprecating mold. But Superman isn't a snarky goofball with a playlist of 70s hits. He's a symbol of hope, a larger-than-life ideal. No amount of misplaced jokes or awkward humor could hide the fact that the tone just didn't fit. The end result? The DCU started to feel less like a cinematic universe, and more like James Gunn's personal sandbox, built, written, and directed by him, for him. He greenlights the projects he's emotionally attached to, keeps the ones starring his friends or family, and shapes everything to fit his own taste, even when it clearly doesn't align with what audiences want. But here's the harsh truth, James. When you're in charge of a multi-billion-dollar franchise, it's not about you anymore. It's about the audience. And that's a lesson you still haven't learned. The gap between what fans want and what James Gunn delivers is only getting wider with every new release. Say what you will about Kevin Feige over at Marvel, at least he knows his creative limits. He delegates, he collaborates, and he lets different voices handle different tones. Gunn, on the other hand, seems determined to control every frame, every script, and every tone, even when it doesn't work. And now there's a new rumor swirling around Hollywood. If Warner Bros. Ends up merging or getting bought by Paramount, a deal that's reportedly inching closer behind closed doors, Gunn's entire DCU might be the first thing to go. And honestly, it wouldn't be a shock. Because at this point, Gunn has managed to fumble what should have been a guaranteed win. He took Superman, one of the most universally beloved characters in history, and somehow made audiences shrug. And when even die-hard DC fans stop caring, that's when you know the brand is in real trouble. So what's next? Keep pouring millions into a cinematic universe that no one's emotionally invested in? Keep pretending that the next Gunn project will magically turn things around? The truth is, you only get one shot at a first impression. And for James Gunn, that first impression may also end up being his last. Anyway, that's all for today's breakdown. Let me know what you think. Is there still hope for Gunn's DCU, or has the curtain already fallen? Until next time, take care, and thanks for watching!